welcome to the Psychohealthology Summit 2018 again. Thank you for joining us for this session. I'm your host, Dr. Eva Detko, and right here with me is Jennifer Cross. Jen has facilitated sexuality trauma survivors and other writing workshops for 15 years, and she has worked with hundreds of writers in collaboration with colleagues, social change organizations, and other institutions, and through her organization, Writing Ourselves Whole. And she is actually the author of Writing Ourselves Whole, using the power of your own creativity to recover and heal from sexual trauma. Jen's fiction and creative nonfiction have appeared in over 50 anthologies and periodicals. Jen holds an MA in Transformative Language Arts from Goddard College and an MFA in Creative Writing from San Francisco State University. So Jen, welcome to the Psychohealthology Summit. As I sort of said before we started recording, you've got such a unique approach to helping people heal their traumas. So I'm really excited to talk to you. And yes, welcome to this event.
Thank you so much. I'm so delighted to get to connect with you and to get to be a part of this incredible, extensive summit. Thank you.
It's our pleasure, mine and everybody else's, and I obviously will start, as I start most of my sessions, by asking you what's led you to do what you do. Perhaps there is a story. I'm guessing there is.
There is. Absolutely. Yes. I got started with this work, as I say, about 15 years ago. I was in the process of getting an MA in Transformative Language Arts, which has to do with using the written or spoken or sung word in ways that impact either individual or social change or both. And I was coming out of course, my own experience of sexual trauma. That's what brings me to this work itself. I loved writing. I always loved writing. I was the kind of kid who always had a book in my hand or a little notebook, and I would be writing a lot. During my adolescence, when I was living with the person who sexually abused me, my stepfather, I pretty much stopped writing. I did a little bit here and there, but it no longer felt like a safe outlet in any way. And it was also I think kept it safe not to expose it to him during that time. And then in my very early 20s, I think I was 21 or 22 when I managed to get away from him, I began writing again. I began journaling. And I would go to the cafe in my town and sit for hours with my notebook and just write and write and write and write. Kind of everything, all of the pieces, all of the things that were inside of me, without having to worry about the impact on anyone else or whether the page was going to judge me or anything like that. And I found that writing has been, over these years, and it's been quite a long time now, has been sort of the sustaining healing place for me. It took several years for me to get to the place where I felt comfortable enough to go to therapy, and I have absolutely participated in individual therapy and group therapy and other healing practices. So writing hasn't been the only thing that I've done. Writing has been kind of a sustaining place for me, though, all the way through. And I began to imagine that this could be probably was a healing and also a place of discovery for other folks, for other survivors as well. And at the time that I was working on my MA, I was very curious about how survivors of sexual violence could get to a different place. Maybe I was curious, maybe myself, how I could get to a different place and a more healed place around my sexuality specifically. And so I came up with the idea of these writing groups for survivors of sexual trauma, in which we weren't writing about our trauma specifically. We were writing about from our adult, lived, consensual, desiring sexuality in a room, though, in which folks we're with other people who really understand what a radical thing that is to do, especially for most of us, I would say, growing up in certainly in the West, in the United States, we're raised with such complicated and messy, difficult ideas about ourselves as sexual beings. then if we're coming out of an experience of sexual violence in any way, that's such a fraught site for us. And so to be able to come together and write fiction, write fantasy, write about what we might want, felt so radical and revolutionary and risky and scary and very exciting and fun also, surprisingly. Maybe not surprisingly, but there was a lot more laughter in the room, I think, than some people imagined that there would be. And we discovered together, this group of women and myself, that we were not only finding language for things that we were not supposed to talk about, and then bringing these stories into voice by reading them aloud if we chose to. And then we were also getting to have those stories held and received by others, and getting to receive and bear witness to other stories as well. And all of those layers were just profoundly transformative. And we began to not only write about our erotic desire, but also our desires for all kinds of things that we wanted to have shift and grow in our lives. And discovered that if we're tapping into maybe one part of our desire that we had tamped down, a lot of other pieces came up behind that. If we've been, trained in any way not to know what we want or believe that we deserve what we want, if we give ourselves room for that to emerge, a lot of those other pieces will come up with that as well. So that was my initial writing groups were focused around sexuality, and those have slowly kind of expanded to include workshops for folks who want to focus more specifically on writing about trauma, writing some of those stories that have been difficult to find language for. And then I have general topic and manuscript focused groups as well. So they've kind of grown out from there.
Wow, that sounds really great. And I wanted to obviously talk more in this event. We didn't so much last year. We didn't focus so much on healing sexual trauma, but of course it's one of the big T's for a lot of people. And in the end, people stuck in chronic illness, oftentimes they have a history of obviously sexual violence, sexual abuse. That includes me, myself personally, and of course, and yourself, and loads of other people who are watching, I'm sure. And so what is interesting, and I've talked to other speakers about this, that we all have our resources, things that we tap into to calm ourselves down, make ourselves feel better, things that the go-to things. And in your case, the writing obviously was one of those things. And yet what's interesting is when people go through the trauma, they often shut the door on those resources. And that's kind of interesting what you just said, that at that time, you didn't, as you were going through it, you were not tapping into that resource. It was only before and afterwards, but not during. So that's interesting also, isn't it? And you already told us how writing about trauma can be beneficial. But I'm just wondering whether in your community and people you have worked with, you're not just working with people who have always written and writing comes naturally to them. I'm guessing that there are a lot of people who are finding you who are actually just discovering this as the new resource for them. Would you say that's true? And if so, what sort of feedback are you getting from your participants?
That's absolutely true. Folks come to the workshops from many different places in terms of their relationship with writing. And some people have always journaled or have some are professional writers, and most people are kind of somewhere in between. Maybe they've been curious about writing, or maybe they used to like to write, but got shut down around their writing in different ways. And, what's interesting is I hear from a lot of people who got shut down in school, either in elementary or secondary school, or even in college, by a professor or a teacher who shamed them around their writing, or who, were more focused on spelling or commas than they were on the content of the work. And I find so many folks holding a great deal of shame and struggle around feeling creative, around feeling like they can write. that this is even an option for them. We have such, I think, mythology around what it means to get to call yourself a writer, what it means to claim that word, or, you know, if you're sitting down and you're journaling, I'm pointing to my notebook right here, that you're not really creative. You're just kind of doing this silly thing on the side. And we have so many of those stories around, ourselves as creative beings. And I have also, many people will come and say, you know, I like to write sometimes. I'm really not creative. I don't really, you know, I'm not a creative writer. I just kind of journal sometimes. And I think that I completely understand that. That feels so self-protective. Absolutely. Right. Let me say it about myself before anybody else tells me I'm not creative, or I'm not interesting, or I'm not really a writer. We learn to protect ourselves in that way. And the structure of the workshops that I use grows out of the one I was trained in, which is called the Amherst Writers and Artists Workshop Method. And it was developed in Amherst, Massachusetts by a woman named Pat Schneider, who's my teacher. And it grows absolutely out of the idea that everyone, all of us, are creative and have artistic genius and brilliance within ourselves. And that has been my experience in the workshops. That when we come together in community, in a community that is generous and kind and open and supportive, and we offer each other the space in which to just let our pens go and trust that creative intuition to lead us wherever it is that we feel like going in that moment with our writing. Whether it means writing from our own experience, whether it means writing a story or a poem, whatever wants to emerge, we get to trust that and put that on the page. And then if we choose to, we can share that with each other, and we get to receive. And sometimes this is maybe the hardest part, is getting to hear from other people how they were impacted by our work and how powerful our work was for them. And specifically what's already strong, what's already resonating for people, what's already creative, what's already happening in the work, even before we've spent any time editing it. Each one, I think there's this mythology that only certain people get to call themselves artists, or only certain people have genius or brilliance, and it's just not been my experience. We all have our own individual lens on the world, and our own music, and our own metaphors and curiosities and ways that we frame things and wonder about things. And there's no way anybody else in the workshop is going to write the same way that I do, or that I'm going to write the same way that they do. And so there's always something that surprises me, that feels fresh, when we just give ourselves the opportunity to let that flow.
Yeah, and it's true. I mean, we, in the West in particular, we are, as I said before, we're born into this culture of judgment, criticism. It's everywhere. We're swimming in it from the word go, the moment we pop out the womb. So it's no real, it's no real surprise that people have those blocks, right? And particularly, as you said, there could be some early childhood experiences whereby a person was criticized or ridiculed, and obviously that's just going to shut them down altogether. But what I love in what you're describing is that you are clearly, in what you're doing, is you're creating the atmosphere of acceptance, of safety, and also, of course, you encourage creativity that is inside everybody, but just you encourage it to flow and to come out in this atmosphere of safety and acceptance. And now all three of those elements are actually conducive to healing. So again, that doesn't actually surprise me that people will have those benefits from doing workshops with you, or doing this sort of work, and allowing themselves to just that free expression once they pass that initial block that they may have, that they actually find it healing, because like I said, all of those elements are healing. So it's a fantastic combination, really. And I'm just curious whether you've had, and you probably you have worked with people who actually initially had that fear and block of just letting the words sort of come and flow. And yet when they have, they're discovering that stuff that is coming out is something that they didn't expect. And suddenly they're even, in awe themselves that they're able to express themselves in this way. Have you actually had people like that?
I have. I can remember a woman in one of my workshops who had been coming for quite a long time, and she wrote very clearly. She tended to write fairly concretely from her own life. She was describing vividly both her past experience and her current life in really concrete language. And I can remember one evening when her writing kind of broke open in a new way. And there was suddenly a lot of figurative language in her writing and a lot of metaphor. And I think she felt it. I think the whole room felt it. And I don't think it was intentional. I mean, I think this was an organic process for her. And it's still risky, though, for us to try on something different, to let our writing go in new directions and not shut it down or not share it. Each step there is a risk, and everyone in the room got to experience that shift for her and that opening. And it was kind of electric in the room. It was amazing.
Yeah, and it sounds to me, coming from a psychotherapy background, as though she was, even though she was giving it a go, she was still guarded. And at some point, she was clearly ready to just let it happen more organically, because it just sounds as though at the beginning she was very sort of matter of fact, and that just happens when people are still not entirely comfortable, and it is a mask. It is we all do it at one point or another in our lives, and so. But then, of course, for one reason or another, she suddenly felt comfortable to actually express herself fully. Good for her. That's really brilliant. That's a brilliant story. So you do actually talk about writing as you describe it, radical self-care. So could you just explain what you mean by that?
I can. Several of the communities I get to inhabit here in the San Francisco Bay Area are activist communities, are creative communities, and people have been talking for several years about deep self-care, radical self-care. And I found myself both using that language and also very curious about it. What is it that makes self-care, taking care of ourselves, radical? And in the book, I say, I think many of us have a sense of that even the very idea of taking care of ourselves feels just completely outlandish, totally outside the norm. Especially those of us who've experienced any kind of violence, intimate violence towards us, whether we were young or older, to be told in such a visceral way that we're not worth caring for and that our needs aren't worth attending to gets in very deeply. And so to make the active decision to not only pay attention to what it is that we need, but to know what it is that we need, to even have that awareness can feel really frightening. I came from an experience in which if I knew what it is that I wanted or needed, if I expressed it in any way, it would be used against me. So it was better for me not even to know. And of course, if we're turning our attention constantly on the needs of other people, that also keeps us from taking care of ourselves. And I think whether we are survivors of direct intimate violence or not, there are many, many of us who are enculturated to take everybody else's needs into account before our own. And so maybe about the time that we're thinking about taking care of ourselves, it's the end of the day, and we've been monitoring the needs of everyone in our home. We've been taking care of our kids. We've been attending to our partners. We've done, the work of kind of emotional labor at work, as well as whatever we were actually hired to do. And we're exhausted by the end of the day. It doesn't make sense for us to sit down and do some writing or paint or go into our studios and work with clay or whatever creative outlet is the strongest and most resonant for us. And so being willing to take our needs into account can feel revolutionary. And I love that I include the quote from one of Audre Lorde's essays. She says, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare." And I using the language of militaristic language is not ideal, but that idea, that we are caring for what we have been trained to believe is not worth caring for is absolutely revolutionary. And it continues to be today. I got to the place in my life where it was most important for me to get up a couple of hours early and write before I took care of anything else, before I did anything else, to really give those first hours and those first breaths to this work that fed me so deeply and also made it possible then for me to show up in the world more fully myself. And that felt very risky. It feels selfish to do that, right? We're trained, you should be going to all the networking events. You should be going to all the parties. You should be showing up. You should be doing all the things that all the other people in your community are doing. And if you're saying, no, I'm not going to do that because I need to go to bed early, because I need to get up at 4:30 in order to have this time, it can feel scary. It can feel selfish. And certainly as a woman, right, I'm not supposed to be selfish. I'm not supposed to care about what it is that I need or put that first. But then we are able to, I think, not only are we changing things for ourselves and communicating to ourselves that we are worth caring for. We know that we're worth caring for. And we know that our creativity is worth making room for. We're also communicating then to everyone else around us that it's okay to take care of yourself. That not only are we worth taking care of but they are as well. And I think that kind of modeling is deeply necessary, and I think it ripples out into our communities and creates change in that way.
It does for sure, and I'm just hoping that people are really listening to every word that you're saying, because from my point of view, working with people with chronic illness, I can definitely say that this is the very reason why a lot of people are sick in the first place. And it takes a shift, you're quite right. And for some people, again, it's one of the blocks, because they will feel guilt. They will feel all sorts of negative emotions if you suggest that they're not going anywhere fast unless they change that attitude and they actually start taking care of themselves first. It's a big shift for a lot of people. But let me just say that one more time. If you don't do that, you will never heal. It's essential. It's absolutely essential. When people have been traumatized and they're already manifesting physically, then in order to heal that, we really do need to put the self-care at the forefront of everything that we do. It is absolutely key. Again, it's the Western culture, isn't it? It's just not okay to do because we're supposed to be selfless. We're supposed to be looking after everybody else before ourselves and so on. But you know what? You need to put your own oxygen mask first when the plane comes crashing down. So there's a reason for that. So it's the same thing here. We've got bits here and there, but I was just sort of wondering whether you could describe the process of writing ourselves whole in a little bit more detail.
Sure. I think that all of us as humans are complicated and have parts of ourselves that are messy and parts of ourselves that are contradictory. And we're supposed to go out into the world and present just a single, unified, clean, clear whole that's the same every day, and that doesn't make anybody uncomfortable. And I think as humans, that's not who we are. We have the selves that we are with our friends, and the selves who we are when we're at work, and the selves who we are when we are grieving, or when we're turned on, or when we are excited and exploring something new, right? And during times of trauma, one of the things that I noticed for myself is that I felt like all of those parts of myself were kind of trying to get out all the time. And I worried about making other people uncomfortable. I worried about alarming other folks if I was kind of going immediately from deep rage to deep grief to deep desire to, right, just all these feelings were so big in me. And what I found was that the page was a place where I didn't have to worry about taking care of anyone else's needs around my being, around myself, around my experience of a recovery, or even just coming into a place of awareness around what I had been through, and coming into new language and new understanding of those experiences. I didn't have to worry about, like I say, taking care of anyone, of their judgment. I didn't have to worry about somebody shutting me down or telling me I was lying or telling me I was making it up, or telling me that I was making a big deal out of something that really wasn't that big a deal. And I think sometimes people say these things in order to be helpful. I think sometimes it's coming out of their own fear and trying to distance themselves, but other times people don't know what to say. And so they say things that aren't helpful. And I found also that I didn't have to worry about overwhelming the page. I could just be my sort of full, messy self. And what's happened over the years is I've been able to accept, maybe get closer and closer to accepting all of my different parts and all of my messiness and all of my humanness, that I'm not this terrible monster and I'm not this perfect saint, but that I'm somewhere in between all the time, just constantly course correcting and trying to live my best life. And it takes a practice to get there, and it takes a while to accept ourselves as complex and complicated and messy. And I have found that a regular writing practice, a place where I talk about it in the book as kind of core dumping, just sort of letting everything out, and not feeling like I have to sequester different parts of myself or hide to put the anger down or put the grief down because it's going to be too much. Nope. All of that can come and be present at the same time. And I'm big enough. We are all big enough to hold all of who we are. And that to me feels like a kind of wholeness.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I just love the way you describe it. And this is what actually pains me personally, to see that very few people these days are actually truly okay to express their individuality. And again, this goes back to cultural conditioning or social engineering, basically, that is just so prevalent. Again, in the Western culture in particular, whereby, from the moment that the kids have any comprehension of anything, that they're sort of put in those little boxes and labeled in all sorts of ways, and they have to conform, and they're expected to do X, Y, Z by this age and X, Y, Z by that age. And so that actually scares me, because that's what kills people's individuality. And as you go through years and decades of that, then it's no surprise that as an adult, you feel a little bit lost, and you always have that mask on, unless you do some self-development work and some therapy, and you decide that actually I am going to fully accept myself with all the quirks and complications and ups and downs that I go through. But again, this is so fundamental, because self-acceptance is at the basis of everything. And when it comes to, again, emotional and physical health, again, you're going nowhere unless you have done some serious work and you accept yourself fully for who you are. And so this is a very, very important concept that you've touched on for sure. But basically, what I also wanted to stress to people watching is that clearly you focus on healing sexual trauma, or assisting people with their healing. But this process that you're describing clearly could work with any other type of trauma, couldn't it?
Absolutely. and this is a question that comes up often during readings or interviews. My core work, right, the work that I tend to do is centered around. I have done work that's centered around specifically sexual trauma survivors, but I don't know of a community who wouldn't benefit from this kind of space in which to name and find language for things around which we've been shamed or silenced. When I think about folks who, in my community who I've known who struggle with autoimmune disease, just the shaming and silencing from the medical community, from friends and family, and the way that we internalize that, I think there's profound use for this kind of practice, I think, for folks in that community as well. All of us have gone through experiences around which we feel shame or silence, around which we don't know how to find language. Maybe we weren't taught the language for this. There's so many. My partner calls them kind of secret clubs, right? Where if we go through, for example, a miscarriage, we might have the idea that we're the only one until we start to talk about it, and then we discover that many, many, many folks in our communities have gone through that experience, and but it's just not something that we're supposed to talk about in polite community, right? We're supposed to there's like this little narrow avenue down which we can travel when we're out in the world around what we can talk about, and then there's all of this other rest of our lived experience, both around things that are struggles for us, and also I think profound joy or ecstasy that we're not supposed to talk about either, right? Big emotion on either side can feel like it's taboo. I think we've all been told around something that we're crazy, that we're too much, that we're different from other people, and so we should keep that part silenced. We have things around which we feel like we can't get it together, and we watch people around us, being able to just get up and go, and for various reasons we can't, and we perceive that they're the ones who are normal, and we're the ones who are broken, and we feel isolated and shamed around it. And the fact is that there are other folks who are feeling similar forms of isolation and shame around similar issues in their lives. And when we can come together in community, whether we're writing alone, certainly writing alone is we don't have to write in a group in order to, I think, reap profound benefits from this particular practice, from just letting yourself find the language for these things that you've been told in various ways not to talk about. But then when we do choose to come together in community, we get to say these things out loud that we're told in various ways not to talk about, and we get to be received and held, and we also get to hear and experience different ways of understanding ourselves and naming ourselves, right? Because each of us are going to write about these experiences and language these experiences differently, and that expands our ideas of ourselves, our understanding of ourselves, and our capacity for existing in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's absolutely so true that being silenced, the silencing that actually people experience from all sorts of angles, as you said, creates isolation. And again, that's not going to help anybody heal. And yes, it's true. People often feel that the person on the other side, it's like other side of the fence, and they're all okay, and they're okay, and I'm the one broken. But they're not considering that the person on the other side of the fence feels probably exactly the same about them and about themselves, right? So, because you never know what really goes on in people's heads and behind closed doors, really. So you mentioned that, of course, people can write individually and they can also write in a group, and it just is an individual preference, isn't it? But I wonder whether you could maybe give people your top tips on how to utilize this practice, as you call it. I love it that you call it practice, like meditation practice, writing practice. yeah, maybe some tips that can help people utilize this successfully as a tool for healing.
One of the things that I like to encourage folks first and foremost to do is to be really easy with yourself and to go slow. I'll have folks sometimes come into my workshops, and in a survivor's workshop, and they've got their notebook and they've got their new pen and they are ready to just get this all out, and then it's going to be done. And I can absolutely understand that impulse and wanting to get it out of your body, wanting to get it out of our heads, our hearts, wanting to write it down, and then it's out and then it's done. And I have found, both with folks in the workshops and in my own experience, that when I try to push too hard to kind of get everything out, I feel physically ill, and the page stops feeling like an inviting place, right? Because it's only a place I go to share things that are terrible or are very painful for me. And so if this is something that you are just beginning, I absolutely encourage you to start by just describing something that happened in your day, or describing something beautiful that you saw on your way to work, or that you can see outside your window, or something interesting that you smelled or you touched recently. Getting in touch with that kind of sensory description and sensory detail. Writing can be so embodying that way when we have to find language for our sensory experience. That means we need to be aware of our senses, and it brings us into our bodies a little bit differently that way. I always encourage us to kind of make room for writing about things that aren't our trauma, things that aren't our violence, or the thing around which we feel a lot of pain or struggle right now. And to kind of just gently move in that direction, and really pay attention to your intuition and your body, and notice that there are going to be times when you're writing about something that's difficult, and of course it's going to be a little uncomfortable, and that makes sense. And sometimes though you'll feel a really strong physical reaction, and then it's okay to pull back. It's okay to say, all right, I'm going to stop with that for right now, and either just be done for the day, or write about something else. It makes sense that there are times when we write about things that are painful that afterwards we feel kind of shaky. We might also feel exhilarated, right? There are different kinds of bodily responses we'll have in the aftermath. There are times that people have felt nauseous, because I think of it sometimes as writing into a wound that's gotten really infected, and it can be painful to kind of get in there and clean that place out. But then after we've done that, we begin to feel better. There's a little bit of that infection that's been cleaned out. And so it's not unusual. It doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong. It doesn't mean that you've harmed yourself by writing something difficult. If you feel, if it feels uncomfortable afterwards. But really pay attention. And if you are feeling like you like the notebook is not a place that you really want to go to, I'll invite folks just to let themselves write something else, write about other things, so that the page is a place that you want to go. It's a place of discovery, and also of creation, that we're not only writing about where we've been, but also envisioning where we might want to go, writing about kind of possibilities, and letting ourselves vision and imagine what else we might want for our lives. And then I think about, with sharing our writing, there are people who are going to really be able to hold our brand new work, and even sometimes people really close to us who maybe aren't going to be the best to hold our brand new work. And if you're sharing, that instinct to read, to share our work, I think is, it's an incredible generosity. It's such a generosity. And I think if you're offering that to someone who cannot meet it as the generosity that it is, maybe even if sometimes it's our partners, I've certainly hear folks say that this person wants to kind of edit or, correct or say, well, maybe you can say it this other way. And that's, when we're talking about writing that has just emerged onto the page, that's just not the kind of feedback that's helpful in the moment. And what we want is to share our work with people who are going to receive it in such a way that it leads us to want to go back to the page and keep writing, and not to have us feel shut down, but to have us feel celebrated and held. But at every step, I always encourage us to just be really gentle with ourselves. If it makes sense, after that, I say often in the book, after a writing prompt, you might spend 20 minutes on this, and then give yourself a walk outside, or give yourself an ice cream cone if that's a thing that's right for you, or something, some way that you're taking care of yourself in addition to writing. That can say to your body, I hear you, and I want to take care of you.
I love it. I love your tips. I love that you emphasizing focusing on the positive and pleasant things, not just on the painful things. I think that, I definitely like that tip a lot. And what's interesting is that you're encouraging this sensory connection. That is very powerful because, and that's probably one of the main reasons why the writing practice can be so profound, is because when people go through whatever traumatic experiences they go through, not everybody, but some people will dissociate, and then they will just become those, as I call them, floating heads, and they just live in their head, and they're just scared to connect anything that goes on in the body. Now, in order to heal trauma, we need to connect to the body. And so it just seems like this could be a really nice, gentle way to ease yourself into making that connection again. So that's why I like so much that you say, do you know what, just don't just focus on the bad stuff, just focus on pleasant and positive things also, because then you can actually connect with positive feelings and emotions as well in your body, not just be overwhelmed by the negative ones. So, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why writing in this way is so profound.
I think giving ourselves room for all of our different emotional and physical and psychic responses is so deeply important. I talk a lot in the workshops about reconnecting with our creative intuition. And at the beginning, you were describing the ways in which sometimes we don't avail ourselves of tools or things that we think are going to help us during difficult times. And certainly this continues to be a struggle for me as an adult. But during the time when I was living with an abuser, it didn't feel safe to me, right, to listen to that little voice, right, our instinct or our intuition that's saying, I need to get out of here right now, or I need to, I want to, spend some time just writing and letting myself be open and curious on the page, because those were not safe in any way, right? Safe ways for me to be. And so I had to kind of stop listening to that intuition. And I got to the place in my life where I believed I really didn't have any intuition. And of course we all do. We all have that voice inside of us that's paying attention, even a little differently than our senses are paying attention. That's giving us a sense of what's going to be best for us in the moment. And very, very slowly but surely. I mean, when I think about this as a practice, I think about this absolutely as kind of like a meditative practice, like something that you can return to, if not every day, then regularly, to rebuild that. It feels like a way of re-entering that conversation with my creativity and with my intuition, and trusting whatever it is that's being kind of thrown up by my psyche to come onto the page in that moment. And following those words, even if I don't feel like I'm guiding them, and trusting where it is that I'm going to go. And that is a deep rebuilding, a deep healing practice that this writing can help with.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And yeah, so I'm hoping that many people listening will latch onto this and perhaps make it their everyday or regular practice, and this will actually be the thing that helps take them further along in their healing journey. Wonderful. I just really enjoyed so much listening to you and having this conversation. Wonderful conversation, and I really hope that there is obviously a lot of content here. I hope people will find it beneficial. So, but before I let you go and before we end, I wanted to ask if there's anything else that you wanted to share with the viewers about, well, maybe what you're currently up to or future projects, anything that you want at all.
This has been such a pleasure. I'm so grateful to have this conversation with you and to hear a little bit more about your work and how these are weaving together. I guess the thing that I would love to invite folks to do is to be in touch with me if you've got more questions or you're interested in, I have online offerings as well as in-person offerings. The book is called Writing Ourselves Whole, and my website is writingourselveswhole.org. And I always love to connect with folks and hear and sort of engage in conversation, hear what you're thinking about, how writing has been of service to you. And I think the thing I wanted to reiterate is just how essential every person's story is. There are times that I have read poems or novels or something, and I think, well, they've done this so much better than I could. I can't. Why would I even bother writing, And the truth is that each one of us is bringing it's bringing their unique and essential part of the story about what it means to live in the world as a human. And I think we need every single voice, and each person's voice, your voice is needed as well. So I hope that whatever creative practice you engage in, you're bringing all of yourself to that, because we need it in the world.
Fantastic. Yeah, wonderful message to end on. Really, really awesome. Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I really do hope that we'll get to do it again sometime.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eva. Thank you. This is wonderful.
Thank you very much for watching.